One of the common questions or concerns that is raised when entering into doctoral studies is the question of how do I balance workload with family life and work? How do I balance my studies? How do I do all this? This seems to be overwhelming. It seems to be a lot. And you're probably right. It is a lot. There is a lot to be sort of digested, a lot of material to be that you go over, and so trying to find a rhythm and a balance is an important part of doctoral studies. Recognize though that right after the beginning, um, for doctoral studies, it's a relatively short period of time, 3 years. It may seem like a long time when you're beginning, but in hindsight, those 3 years pass relatively quickly. And so it's important to know that as you're beginning this process, this is going to be something that is going to require, yes, time commitment, energy, but it's a relatively short season in which you're changing some patterns and arranging life a little bit differently. But there's some intentionality behind that that can be really helpful. It can set new kinds of patterns and opportunity for maybe restructuring life in ways that will be more helpful, and to do so intentionally with your community. So part of what I think is important is to begin having conversations with those people that are going to be most integral to your success, your spouse, perhaps your children, your board if you're working with the church or a nonprofit organization perhaps. But the people that you're going to be most involved with in terms of recognizing the responsibilities that you have and this new kind of workload that is going to be part of doctoral studies. So right at the beginning, have those conversations, recognizing that there's going to be some things that you can say yes to, but in order to say yes to, you also have to say no to other things. So it may be in order for you to say yes to these doctoral studies, there's going to be certain things in terms of responsibilities that for this season, you will have to say no to. You'll have to delegate. You'll have to bring in partners that will be able to support you. Just recognizing that you need to create new kinds of rhythms and spaces in order to be able to facilitate the learning that will be necessary and important. Having said that, there's also times where you will have to say no to the studies as well. This sounds like a really strange thing to say as an administrator, but recognizing that you can't do everything. You can't read every book. You won't be able to read every line. But there's ways of skimming. There's ways of curating materials that will be helpful rather than getting into a book and recognizing this is not going to be a helpful book. So you don't have to read the whole thing. If you get sort of a sense of this is the direction the book is going, it's not really the direction that's going to be helpful for what I'm trying to do or for the area that I'm really trying to focus on. And so I'm going to shift my energies in a different direction. Those are okay things. At least you have an idea of another kind of part of this conversation. And that's really what you're trying to become acquainted with is the larger field, what's being said, who are the voices that are part of this conversation. What are the kinds of edges of what this might look like. And so recognizing that even in your studies, there's going to be moments where you cannot do everything, and that's okay. Figuring out ways and things that are going to be sustainable again is what you're needing to do. So as you're beginning to read material, what are the things that you absolutely need to read? What are the things that are going to be essential, important, foundational kinds of text and materials or voices that you need to engage? And as you're doing that kind of work, recognizing that there may be things that you just need to sort of skim through, maybe picking out a chapter that's going to be especially pertinent. Those are okay things to do as well. So just recognizing you have limited time and energy, and you can't do everything. That's okay. That's part of the ongoing work of learning and education. So just be aware of that. Give yourself some grace. On top of that, or in addition, there's a couple of things that I think can be helpful as well. So this comes from John Cleese. He did a workshop on creativity in the workplace, and he's obviously speaking from the aspect of humor, but he talks about the kinds of things that need to be in place in order for a person to be creative, a person to actually have opportunity for creativity. And I think that's part of what a Doctor of Ministry program is intended to do. Not to be novel necessarily, but to be creative, to learn some things that will help you to be implementing and being creative in your workplace, your context, for the sake of the kingdom. So a couple of things that he mentions is you have to have time. You have to have time that's carved out intentionally. He would suggest that you don't spend a full day on something, but that you have a regular pattern of, say, an hour and a half each day, or an hour and a half several times throughout the week, that you are focused. That part is set aside for just that one task. Maybe it's reading and writing for your doctoral studies. Maybe it's writing a sermon, whatever it might be. But for the doctoral program, I think that would be really helpful. What are the kind of time spaces that will be really conducive for having quiet and intense focus for that hour and a half? And you know that once that hour and a half is up, you're done for that time being. One of the patterns that I've narrated before, but one of the patterns for me, just given my life space with young children, working as a co-lead pastor, and also teaching online as an adjunct faculty, my pattern had to be a little bit different. So I would usually read for 30 minutes to an hour in the morning before I went off to work, or when I first got to work. And then I would read for anywhere for an hour, maybe an hour and a half in the evenings after everybody had gone to bed. And that's also where I would do a lot of my writing. So the pattern was I would do that at least 5 to 6 times a week. And by the time I had gone through the entire week, I had several hours where I was reading and writing. And that became a consistent pattern that helped me sustain the life of my doctoral studies. That may not work for you. It may be something that you carve out time in the afternoons. You go to a space that's going to be separated out from your typical work, just so that you have a cue for this space is a sacred space for this particular work that I'm doing. So time. The other piece that he mentions is you have to have time. And what he means by this second sort of piece of time is that in order for you to be creative, in order for you to create transformative proposals, you have to really sit with problems. You can't just go to the easy solutions. And typically what happens in doctoral studies as you are working, you may have a sort of prescribed solution to a perceived problem that you already have. You, for instance, may be working with loneliness in adolescence, and you may think that the solution will be X, whatever that might be. So you have already determined what you think is the problem, at least conceptually, and then you often come in with what you think is going to be kind of the area or kind of the way that you will propose a solution. That may not necessarily be a wrong solution, but perhaps there's other solutions that will be better or fuller, whatever it might be. So the other piece of this time is that you sit with the problem long enough that you don't just check in for easy solutions, that you are actually working through the material and considering all the different kinds of angles. And creativity comes both in whether it's sermon preparation or writing a book or creating a script or whatever it is. Creativity often comes when we've sat with a problem long enough and understand that problem in a deep enough way that the first solution is maybe a decent solution, but there's something that when we do that digging piece and really invest ourselves in understanding the problem, that solutions we may not have considered previously can emerge. So sitting and working at that problem and not just simply having the solution that's easiest is one way that we can be creative and use our time. So as you're beginning this initial work of doctoral studies, I would encourage you to set space aside where there is designated time, where you're saying no to other things so that you can say yes for this season to intense study and preparation, recognizing you have limitations. You can't read and do everything, but within reason, doing that initial work. And then as you're doing that work, not to just simply settle on easy solutions, but to continue to set with the problem in such a way that you're continuing to wrestle with it, and um, allowing yourself permission to be playful with solutions and just seeing what happens.